Greetings, everybody. I'm Betsy Brune. I'm the director of the museum. I'm excited to be able to introduce your keynote speaker, who is Carmen Ramos. Carmen has been working with us since October of 2010. She came to be our first ever curator of Latino art. It probably says something about us that it took us this long to have a curator of Latino art. It sort of highlights something else that's always true about art and artists. We reflect the broader, wider world we live in. And so as Latino issues have been coming to the fore in recent years, it suddenly dawns on us that of course we should have a major collection and a curator in charge of it, and someone to come in every day and think about how we represent Latinos in the larger picture of American art. And Carmen fits that bill. She's been buying amazing things. It's been an education for me just to see what she's bringing in. I've learned so much about Latino history and the history of the politics, the history of the art, the ancient history. You know, there was just an article in, I think it was the New York Post, about how, you know, before the Puritans and before the Pilgrims, this nation was first and foremost Spanish-speaking and Catholic. And so the idea that somehow this is new and that we have to worry about it as something new is, of course, wrong. We're very proud to start our historical survey of American art with New Spain on the second floor, right next to the model of the Statue of Liberty. So Carmen came. She has a wonderful education. She has a BA from NYU. She has a Ph.D. from the University of Chicago. She wrote her dissertation about a historical Cuban artist. She comes extremely well prepared with all the history. She's also very good with contemporary artists, and her show will focus more in that area, which you'll be hearing about. It's called Our America, the Latino Presence in American Art. And we love that title because it sort of symbolizes the warm embrace that we mean to signal. The show will debut here in October, and it stays until March. So I hope you'll have an occasion maybe to come back and see it. But if not, it's then going on tour, and it's going to Miami and Delaware and Salt Lake City and Sacramento and someplace else. Maybe San Antonio? Maybe. So look for it in a museum near you. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Carmen.
Thank you, Betsy, for your very nice introduction. I'm always so impressed by our director and love to hear her speak. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon and to have the opportunity to introduce a project that I've been working on for close to 3 years. The Smithsonian American Art Museum has a pioneering collection of Latino art, which encompasses works by artists of Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, and Dominican descent, as well as other diasporic Latin American groups with deep roots in the United States. Since I've been here, I've led an initiative to expand this collection, which is one of the few of its kind in a non-culturally specific museum, so that it represents the expansive breadth and depth of Latino art. Selections from this broadened collection will be presented this fall in an exhibition titled Our America, the Latino Presence in American Art. From the beginning, I sought to bring together not only important works by leading Latino artists, but also to stake an ambitious claim for Latino art in the nation's capital. While the Smithsonian as a whole has global collections and initiatives, it is also an eminently national institution whose efforts are wedded to notions of our collective national patrimony. The Smithsonian American Art Museum in particular is not just any museum, it's the National Museum. And taken at face value, this idea can conjure the narrowest or most inclusive expectations of what should be housed within its walls. I've asked myself this question many times. How best to frame Latino art in this national context, where most of our visitors are not Latino? These observations led me to ponder both the roots of the category of Latino art, as well as popular conceptions about our national culture. Historically speaking, Latino art and related terms emerged in the late 1960s through the 1980s as political statements and as terms of solidarity, uniting artists of related cultural and historical experiences against the exclusionary practices of US-based cultural institutions. During this period in New York, for instance, artists began to advocate for the greater representation of works by African American, Latino, and women artists in the collections and exhibitions of major American museums. It was within these contexts that terms like Black and Puerto Rican art, and by extension Latino art, gained greater currency as underrepresented facets within the category of American art. I've also considered that in the United States, we commonly critique notions of ethnic identity for being restrictive, yet wondered whether we do enough to question what counts as American or who is considered an American artist. This is an important question for a field with a plethora of museums and publications that bear its name. When we ask these questions, it becomes clear that the history of American art, as told through museum collections, exhibitions, and key texts, remains deficient of Latino participants and protagonists. The exhibition Our America, therefore, embarks from the simple assertion that Latino art is American art, or stated more precisely, that Latino art is an integral part of the art of the United States. This declaration is not meant to deny the transnational nature of Latino art that bounds it to the culture and history of Latin America. It does not seek to downplay the disruptive undercurrent of Latino art that opposes singular views of American culture. It also does not advocate that we return to a closed vision of national culture that disregards past and present global realities. Rather, it calls attention to the underemphasized and rich connections between Latino art and the national context in which it was born. On the one hand, the affirmation that Latino art is American art is simply a fact. Latino artists are American by birth, citizenship, residence, education, experience, and even sacrifice, a factor made clear by the large number of Latino artists that have served in the US Armed Forces. On the other hand, the statement poses a challenge to the ways in which we traditionally think about what constitutes American culture. Our America urges that we not only affirm Latino art as American art, but that we ask and answer how and to what effect it is part of this national category. Taking this step requires that we see Latino artists not as isolated figures embroiled in an intergroup conversation about identity, but as peers dialoguing with other American artists and their national contexts. When positioned in this light, it becomes clear that Latino artists shape and participate in the artistic movements of their day, tackle questions and themes tied to American national identity, and probe our popular culture, often but not exclusively, from the perspective of Latino experience. In fact, there are many individual Latino artists who worked alongside their American peers well before the category of Latino art was established, yet their careers remained absent from the annals of American art. Painters such as Cuban-born Carmen Herrera produced abstract works in keeping with her times. Herrera moved to the United States in 1939, and following a sojourn in Paris, she returned permanently to the United States to become a participant in the New York avant-garde. Her geometric canvases, marked by bold, angular forms piercing through space, would anticipate the later developments of hard-edge minimalism and op art. During the 1950s and after, Herrera befriended some of the leading post-war abstractionists, such as Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman. By including Herrera's works in our collection, we are finally able to stage what may be the first real-time museum encounter between her work and that of her US-based peers, like Ellsworth Kelly, another American artist who was also drawn to Paris after World War II. Puerto Rican-born Olga Albizu, on the other hand, first embraced abstraction on the island and then continued in New York when she studied with Hans Hofmann, the German émigré artist who had a decisive impact on mid-century American art. In joyous works like Radiante or Radiant, Albizu worked with 3 or 4 colors in a single canvas to orchestrate what she called a conversation between color and form. Her intense color palette conveys that, like other abstract expressionists, she believed in the emotive power of color. Albizu's works are recognized worldwide since her canvases grace the covers of several jazz albums, including the bossa nova classic Ges Gilberto. Yet she too is absent or is not incorporated into the history of abstract expressionism. A great deal of my collecting efforts have focused on artists like Herrera and Albizu, who worked in the post-World War II era. While this is not the beginning of Latino art, it is at this historical juncture that Latino art starts to get labeled. First, through specific categories such as Mexican American and Puerto Rican, and increasingly through the umbrella category of Latino. This naming happens for at least two reasons. One, it is during the mid-century period that Latino artists are increasingly educated at American art schools. And two, in part motivated by Latino service in the military during and after World War II, Latino communities began to question their marginalized position in American society, as well as the prevailing melting pot discourses that shaped our vision of American culture. My research reveals that these factors started to merge and that Latino artists began to inflect the movements and tropes of American national identity with new perspectives drawn from Latino experience. You see this kind of merging in El Tamalito de Rollo, an early painting by Roberto Chavez that pictures a young boy from his own Los Angeles neighborhood. After his military service in the Korean War and with funds made possible by the GI Bill, Chavez studied at UCLA and eventually helped launch a brand of expressionist painting associated with Los Angeles in the early 1960s. In his early works, Chavez started to use the style to critique the conditions of poverty faced by many Mexican Americans. In this canvas, Chavez depicts a young boy wearing high waters and army surplus boots and with a grayish skin tone similar to the concrete sidewalk upon which he stands. Behind him, a dilapidated structure and white picket fence counters the hope of the American suburban dream we so associate with the decade of the 1950s. The painting at once communicates the individual personality of this young boy as well as the social conditions in which he lived. While artists like Chavez depicted people and places that surrounded him, other Latino artists delve into the annals of national history to create works that question established versions of American history, especially events that have shaped the Latino experience. Many Latino artists are drawn to the 19th century, a period that witnessed American Western expansion across the continent and the rise of the United States as an imperial power. The appropriation of lands following the Mexican-American War not only advanced the goals of Manifest Destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to control most of North America, it also converted residents of Mexico's northern frontier into American citizens overnight. Even though their status as American citizens was ratified as part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, the experience of Mexican-turned-American populations in the Southwest runs counter to their new citizenship. Historian Vicky Ruiz has summarized that Mexicans in the US side of the border became second-class citizens, commonly divested of their property, political power, and cultural entitlements. For these and other reasons, many historians mark the moment of westward expansion as the beginning of the Mexican-American community, a history that remains marginalized even in revisionist accounts of the West. Artistically speaking, Western expansion was visualized through extensive photographic portfolios by artists such as William H. Jackson, who captured majestic vistas of recently acquired lands that largely excluded traces of earlier residents, in favor of works that depict an empty frontier waiting to be inhabited, tamed, and developed. In Jackson's photograph on the left, only the title of the work, which includes the Spanish word cañón, complete with a tilde over the end, suggests these earlier residents and history. Delilah Montoya's desert landscapes contest these empty scenes. Taken on the border between Arizona and Mexico, her photographs themselves resort to empty landscapes, yet they too suggest the trace of another history. Montoya's work initially began as an effort to raise awareness about the humanitarian crisis along the US-Mexico border. This photograph captures the activities of nonprofit groups like Humane Borders, who legally place water tanks along the desert to prevent migrant deaths from dehydration. As the project unfolded, Montoya became increasingly aware of the complexity of life in the region. In Desire Line's Baboquivari Peak, Arizona, she shot a view on the Tejano Reservation, whose lands and people are divided between the state of Arizona and the Sonora region of Mexico. Sonora-based Tejano people become border crossers when attempting to enter their ancestral homeland. Montoya worked closely with one tribal member, seen on the left, who scatters water jugs along the reservation's border. In the distance, the hazy outline of the Baboquivari Mountains, the site of Tejano creation myths, attests to the history embedded in this land. In a region so historically and politically complex, clear notions of native, migrant, insider, and outsider are morally difficult to navigate. Puerto Rican artists also interrogated the island's historic relationship to the United States. Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory at the end of the so-called Spanish-American War of 1898, when the island was ceded to the United States by Spain. For the United States, Puerto Rico was a sought-after possession, a strategic outpost that could help secure a future canal in Central America. Since then, the relationship between the island and the U.S. grew increasingly complex, negotiated through several congressional acts that sealed the island's ambiguous political status as an unincorporated territory that is now considered a freely associated state or commonwealth. Since 1917, Puerto Ricans are born American citizens, yet island residents cannot vote in federal elections. Over the course of her lengthy career, Mirna Baez has consistently examined Puerto Rico's unique landscape to affirm the island's independent political identity. In Platanal, she focuses her gaze on a field of plantain trees, a crop that since the Spanish colonial period has been wedded to concepts of Puerto Rican identity and sovereignty. A key accoutrement of the Jibaro, or Puerto Rican peasant, the plantain appears in iconic paintings such as Our Daily Bread by Ramon Frade, which depicts a humble farmer whose straw hat functions like a halo. Rather than focus on the plantain as a daily bread that literally sustains island residents, Baez deploys the icon to assert a sense of place that she can appreciate as an island insider. Baez relishes in the surface beauty of the plantain leaves as they reflect the tropical sun and delights in her use of paint on an unprimed canvas. In the end, Baez displays a willful intent to look, depict, and therefore possess the land on her own terms. While Latino artists routinely turn to the 19th century, it was the tumultuous period of the 1960s and 70s, what we now consider the civil rights era, that drew Latino artists decisively into the American political and cultural sphere. The massive mobilizations for equity and social justice were a response to the African American civil rights movement, the international student movement, and the Cuban Revolution, all which spurred the quest for civil rights and full cultural citizenship. In the Southwest, a new generation of Mexican Americans rebaptized themselves Chicanos, opposing cultural assimilation and asserting pride in their mixed race or mestizo heritage. Artists like Amado Peña communicated these ideas by adopting and recontextualizing Mexican symbols, such as a tripartite head that envisions the union of Spanish and indigenous people that engendered Mexicans and their descendants. Puerto Ricans on the East Coast call themselves Nuyorican to signify their diasporic experience. Marcos Dimas' bold painting Pariah that depicts a defiantly racially mixed figure reveals how Nuyorican artists dramatically altered notions of Puerto Rican culture to emphasize its African and indigenous roots. Galvanized by the times in which they lived, many Latino artists became masters of socially engaged art. Many reinvigorated mural and graphic traditions in an effort to reach ordinary people where they lived and worked. In this way, Latino artists not only chronicled a turning point in American society, they actively shaped history. Emmanuel Martinez, for example, created the altar upon which Cesar Chavez broke his highly publicized 25-day fast in 1968. On one side of the altar, a crucifixion bears a brown-skinned Christ, and on the other, an indigenous woman holds wheat and grapes that prefigure the bread and wine of communion. Martinez defined social struggle in Christian terms by combining elements of spirituality and mestizaje. Like that ceremonial object, many of the posters in our collection have a specific story behind them. In 1973, Javier Viramontes created this poster in support of the United Farm Workers Union. That year, Chavez initiated a new grape boycott in reaction to the violent intervention of the Teamsters in the California labor struggle. In response, Viramonte produced Boycott Grapes, an image that shows an Aztec warrior wearing an elaborate headdress. Only his fists are visible as they clench grapes, bursting with juice and blood. These figures, key symbols of Christian and Mesoamerican rituals, suggest the role of farm workers as sacrificial victims. It is their lifeblood that falls over the text and at the bottom of the poster, urging viewers to boycott grapes in the name of the UFW. Oops, I'm sorry. That's it. Give you a second to look at it. Younger artists like Margarita Cabrera have taken the classic Chicano theme of labor in directions responsive to our changing times. Her soft sculptures, which take on the appearance of toasters, blenders, and other domestic objects, began with her discovery that many of the appliances used in American homes were assembled in assemblage plants located across the US-Mexico border. Unlike the pristine new products sold to the American consumer, Cabrera's life-size replicas of common household appliances bear the trace of her own laborious process. In lieu of the plastic components that are manufactured in Mexico, Cabrera uses vinyl, a synthetic product that also resembles skin. Their languid shapes sag as if they're about to collapse under their own weight. The string used to bind the vinyl is left long and exposed, making the objects appear hairy and unkempt. By anthropomizing her sculptures, Cabrera references Mexican labor that ironically supports leisurely middle-class lifestyles in the United States. Cabrera's works, which allude to Klaus Oldenburg's monumentally scaled soft sculptures of appliances and everyday objects, belie her intent to raise consumer awareness. Rather than focus on the plight of the domestic factory worker, a dwindling figure in a society where practically all goods are made in China, Korea, or Mexico, Cabrera shifts her attention to the US consumer, who purchases products manufactured under harsh working conditions. As these examples reveal, Latino artists participate in a major thematic thread in American art: labor. From images of toiling slaves and sharecroppers in 19th century painting to depictions of the heroic worker in Depression-era art, labor has been a major subject in the history of American art. Working on behalf of civil rights, Latino artists, however, sought to disrupt rather than uphold the status quo. To do so, they not only represented laboring peoples, but sought to galvanize them and the public to take political action. Beyond addressing labor themes, Latino artists ushered a national paradigm shift that questioned ethnic and racial stereotypes and affirmed that Latino experience was worthy of representation. Like African American artists such as Joe Overstreet, who challenged stereotypes like the mammy, Latino artists also gravitated to the intersections of race and American consumer culture. Disparaging representations of Latinos and Latin Americans had long been part of American popular culture, especially films, which featured Mexican banditos or over-the-top characters like Carmen Miranda's Brazilian Bombshell. Since the late 1940s, American corporations such as Frito-Lay and Chiquita brands mimicked these representations in their advertising and product packaging for Latino-related foodstuffs like corn chips and bananas. In the late 60s, while Chicano activists were lobbying to remove the Frito Bandito from public circulation, Mel Casas painted the mascot the mascot, as a centerpiece of Humanscape 62, a painting that is part of a series of works that explore the impact of media images. The Frito Bandito appeared on product merchandising and television commercials, but also promotional giveaways, like this green eraser that found its way into Casas' painting. Casas was part of a generation of pop artists like Andy Warhol that witnessed firsthand the rising influence of American advertising in cinematic culture. Here, he unites a series of trivialized and meaningful brown references drawn from American and indigenous cultures. Casas divided his canvas into 3 zones, beginning at the top with a screen image of a tempting plate of brownies as they might appear on a commercial, and ending with the text at the bottom. The foreground is the most complex and multi-layered part of the composition. On the left, right, and center, Casas depicts a stoic Native American presented in profile, a group of unassuming Native or Mexican American women, and a junior Girl Scout, a brownie. Near the center foreground, in front of a jade, double-headed serpent, a green-colored Frito Bandito rides on the shoulders of a skeleton. These latter figures refer to actual Mesoamerican objects. The double-headed snake represents the Aztec deity Quetzalcoatl and is based on a jade pendant in the collection of the British Museum. And the skeletal figure resembles a greenstone statuette in a German collection and represents Xolotl, the deformed twin of Quetzalcoatl. Such incongruent juxtapositions simultaneously critique the trivialization of Chicano culture and allude to the rich culture's stereotypes obscure. Casas was not alone in debunking stereotypes through ironic juxtaposition. In 2002, Adal created a sculpture and video that literally deconstructs West Side Story, the classic 1961 film that widely introduced Puerto Ricans into American popular culture. West Side Story was set in New York City among rival Puerto Rican and white ethnic gangs. The film presented Puerto Rican characters as criminals and spitfires, all the while superficially treating the poverty that spurred islanders' migration to the mainland. The video, which is embedded in the suitcase, interweaves distorted, blurred, and upside-down film clips from West Side Story with documentary photos of Puerto Rican migrants, pointed quotations by the poet Pedro Pietri, and footage of mambo dancers in New York City. Adal's carefully constructed montage uncovers how West Side Story was not only inspired by the explosion of Puerto Rican migration, but also indebted to the Latin jazz and mambo boom centered in New York's Palladium Ballroom. For artists working since the 1960s, to simply document Latino life could serve to challenge media stereotypes. Sophie Rivera, for example, used her camera to capture glimpses of the Puerto Rican community of New York at a time when activists protested against the film Fort Apache, the Bronx. Her 2 untitled portraits feature Puerto Ricans who traversed New York City. Rivera sought out her subjects by standing in front of her building and asking passersby if they were Puerto Rican. If they answered yes, she invited them to her studio and photographed them against a wood-paneled background. The size of the printed photographs, each is 4 feet square, monumentalize their subjects and magnify details. The sitters present themselves in a dignified and unsentimental way. The man's eyes are sunken and he looks slightly pale and weathered. Barely visible under the collar of his shirt is a beaded necklace that suggests he may be a practitioner of Santeria, an Afro-Caribbean faith. The young woman has carefully styled her hair after Farrah Fawcett's famed feathered and flipped hairdo. Unlike traditional portraits, which often identify sitters by name, Rivera's subjects remain anonymous, even to her. By visually revealing her subjects in great detail and simplicity, yet leaving them unnamed, Rivera allows viewers to reach their own conclusions about who these individuals are. Artists such as Oscar Castillo and Emilio Sanchez focus less on individuals than on the cities in which they lived. Working respectively on the West and East Coasts, they recorded the ways in which Latino communities remade the American urban landscape. Castillo's photograph on the left captures a view of a Mexican market whose facade is peppered with Spanish language references to Mexican food. Parked outside of the store is a vintage lowrider, a major signifier of Chicano urban culture. Sanchez captured Latino neighborhoods in New York, where stores were commonly named after people, places, and things from the Caribbean. Here he depicts the supermarket La Rumba, named for a music and dance style popular in Cuba in the 1920s and 30s. The awning is also peppered with Spanish words for ice cream, fruits, and sweets. This brightly hued structure recalls Caribbean domestic architecture and suggests how Latino culture transformed the appearance and language of this major American metropolis. Other artists turned to abstraction to probe the birth of Latino cultural forms in the United States. Freddy Rodriguez, who emigrated to the United States from the Dominican Republic in 1963, created these syncopated abstractions to capture the pulse of Latino music fusions. Arriving at the youthful age of 18, he studied art in New York, where he was drawn to Mondrian's jazz-inspired works and the shaped canvases of younger artists like Frank Stella that he encountered at the Museum of Modern Art. Painted in the early 1970s, these three paintings were created during a time when Caribbean migrants in New York birthed salsa, a musical form born from an amalgam of Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican, and US-based rhythms, and which was recorded by new record labels such as Fania. What is striking about these paintings is their intense physicality, evoked by titles such as Danza Africana, which refer to dance. At 8 feet tall, the paintings are close to life size, and their crisscrossing lines suggest the movement of dancing couples. One of the canvases even depicts fleshy colors like pink and dark beige. All three titles reference Africa or diasporic traditions like carnival. These interests place Rodriguez among a generation of Latino artists who challenge racial hierarchies to affirm the African root of Caribbean cultures. Works by Rodriguez suggest that Latino artists critically probe the new layers of the African diasporic experience in the United States. For Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, who is seen on the left in a performance from 1994, her migration to the United States brought her into contact with African American artists who challenged conventional representations of Black culture. Campos Pons began to explore these issues before her departure from Cuba in the late 1980s, but living in another African diasporic nation opened up new questions. Right at the time when Campos Pons began to experiment with new media, such as Polaroid photography, she began to see herself as part of a global African diaspora. She became well known for her vibrantly hued photographs, like the one seen on the right, that captured private performances where the artist embellished her body and environments with the accoutrements associated with specific Afro-Cuban deities. Constellation is from a series of ambitious Polaroid compositions that reference Blackness in a more evocative way. 16 photographs arranged in a grid present fragments of the artist's hair against painted environments that evoke the sky, a body of water, or a map. The central 4 panels depict her head from above, and the surrounding photographs record locks or balls of hair at different regions of proximity and distance. Like a constellation in the sky, viewers can see the whole composition and its individual parts. Dreamlike and visually fractured, the work evokes the rupture of slavery and the ability of the imagination to bridge the gaps of time and space. For artists such as Campos Pons, African spiritual culture and historical experience is a constant touchstone that bonds her with other African diasporic artists. I want to end my talk with the work that I believe embodies the multidimensional goals of our collection and upcoming exhibition. Maria's Great Expedition was created by Cristina Fernandez and relays the life story of Maria Gonzalez, the artist's great-grandmother and the first member of her family to migrate from Mexico to the United States. To construct her story, the artist interviewed relatives, studied American and Mexican history, and photographed herself assuming the guise of her great-grandmother at key moments in her life. The final presentation takes the form of a museum installation about the discovery and settlement of North America. It includes a map outlining Maria's movement through Mexico and several southwestern states, imagined photographs of Maria, as well as a detailed written narrative that interweaves fragments of her life within a larger view of American history from 1910 to 1950. Each photograph and accompanying text reveals how Mexican Americans helped build the American West. The first installment in the story, titled 1910, Leaving Morelia, ties Maria's decision to migrate to the unrest caused by the Mexican Revolution and the growing demands for cheap labor in the United States. The photograph portrays a young woman looking outside the picture frame as if she were contemplating her future. In Colorado, we learned that Maria supported her growing family by providing food and lodging to European immigrant minors. By the time Maria moves to Boyle Heights in Los Angeles in the 1940s, we learned that her sons participated in the World War II effort, and that Mexican Americans and African American workers filled labor shortages caused by the internment of Japanese Americans and rising military enlistments. Maria's individual yet complex story offers a remarkable picture of the overlapping relationships between national and group histories. Like the larger spirit that propels our America, Maria's Great Expedition marks a deep historical presence and exposes the absences in our national imaginary. The installation also makes its viewers aware that this is a present-day intervention in the historical past. The protagonist, who is impersonated by the artist, never ages over her 40-year history. Some pictures are sprinkled with present-day references, like a 99-cent store flyer. Most significantly, each picture takes on the shifting photographic conventions of 20th century American photography. The picture, 1930 transporting produce, for example, looks like a period photograph that documents the lives of struggling Americans during the Depression. These self-reflective strategies not only allow Fernandez to pointedly insert Mexican American history where it has been left out, they also convey that all histories, whether familial, group, or national, are constructed. The need to document this history as late as 1996, when Fernandez completed this project, speaks to the work that remains to be done to construct a fuller picture of the American experience. I hope that our Latino collection allows our viewers to reflect on the ongoing and rich contributions of Latino artists to our national culture. Thank you.